Hey, welcome to a quiet corner of the internet. If you have a heavy heart and a tired spirit, you're welcome here. I'm gonna read to you while you hold yourself a little tighter. If you're up for it, let me know what you're having. Comforting beverage taste I'm having my rooibos tea. And we're reading Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. You let me catch you fooling around at school again, you hear? Your mother couldn't read and she couldn't write neither before she died. None of the family couldn't before they died. I can't, and here you're swelling up yourself up like this. I ain't the man to stand it, you hear? Say, let me hear you read. I took up a book and began something about General Washington and the wars. When I'd hear about half a minute, he fetched the book a whack with his hand and knocked it across the house. Hello, welcome. He says, it's so, you can do it. I had my doubts when you told me. Now looky here, you stop that pun on that frills. I won't have it. I'll lay for you, my smarty, and if I catch you about that school, I'll tan you good. First you know you get that religion too. I never see such a son. He took up a little blue and yellow picture of some cows and a boy and says, what's this? It's something they gave me for learning my lessons good. He tore it up and says, I'll give you something better. I'll give you a cowhide. He sat there mumbling and growling a minute, and then he says, ain't you a sweet scented dandy though? A bed and bedclothes and a looking glass and a piece of carpet on the floor, and your own father got to sleep in the hogs in the tanyard. I never see such a son. I'll bet I'll take some of these frills out of you before I'm done with you. Why, there ain't no end to your airs. They say you're rich, eh? How's that? They lie, that's how. Looky here, mind how you talk to me. I'm a standin' about all I can stand now, so don't give me no sass. I've been in town 2 days and I ain't heard nothing about you being rich. I heard about it away down the river too. That's why I come. You get me that money tomorrow. I want it. I ain't no money. That's a lie. Judge Thatcher's got it. You get it. I want it. I ain't got no money, I tell you. You ask Judge Thatcher. He'll tell you the same. All right, I'll ask him and I'll make him bungle too. Or I'll know the reason why. Say how much you got in your pocket. I want it. I ain't got only $1 and I want that too. It don't make no difference what you want it for. You just shell it out. He took it and bit it to see if it was good, and then he said he was going down to get some whiskey. He said he hadn't had a drink all day. When he had got out on the shed he put his head in again, and cussed me for putting on frills and trying to be better than him. And when I reckoned he was gone, he come back and put his head in again, and told me to mind about that school because he was going to lay me for and lick me if I didn't drop that. Next day he was drunk, and he went to Judge Thatcher and bully-ragged him, and tried to make him give up the money, but he couldn't. And then he swore he'd make the law force him. The judge and the widow went to the law to get the court to take me away from him and let one of them be my guardian. But it was a new judge that had just come, and he didn't know the old man, so he said courts mustn't interfere and separate families if they could help it. Said he'd rather not take a child away from its father. So Judge Thatcher and the widow had to quit on the business. That pleased the old man till he couldn't rest. He said he'd cowhide me till I was black and blue if I didn't raise some money for him. I borrowed $3 from Judge Thatcher, and Bob took it and got drunk, and went blowing around and cussing and whooping and carrying on, and he kept it up all over town with a tin pan till most midnight. Then they jailed him, and next day they had him before court and jailed him again for a week. But he said he was satisfied. Said he was boss of his son. He'd make him warm for him. When he got out, the new judge said he was going to make a man out of him. So he took him to his own house and dressed him up and cleaned him nice, and had him to breakfast and dinner and supper with the family, and was just all pie to him, so to speak. And after supper he talked to him about temperance and such things, till the old man cried, and said he'd been a fool, and fooled away his life, but now he was going to turn over a new leaf, and be a man nobody wouldn't be ashamed of, and he hoped the judge would help him and not look down on him. The judge said he could hug him for them words, so he cried, and his wife, she cried again. Bob said he'd been a man that always been misunderstood before, and the judge said he believed it. The old man said that what a man wanted was sympathy, and the judge said it was so they cried again. And when it was bedtime, the old man rose up and held out his hand and says, "Look at it, gentlemen and ladies, all, take it, shake it. There is a hand that was the hand of a hog, but it ain't so no more. It's the hand of a man that started on a new life, and I'll die before he'll go back. You mark them words. Don't forget it. I said them. It's a clean hand now. Shake it. Don't be afraid." So they shook it, one after the other all around, and cried. The judge's wife, she kissed it, and the old man, he signed a pledge, made his mark. The judge said it was the holiest time on record or something like that. Then they tucked the old man into a beautiful room, which was the spare room, and the night sometime he got powerful thirsty, and clomb out of the porch roof, and slid down a stanchion, and traded his new coat for a jug of 40 rod, and clomb back again and had a good old time. And towards daylight he crawled out again, drunk as a fiddler, and rolled off the porch and broke his left arm in 2 places, and was most froze to death when somebody found him after sun up. And when they come to look at the spare room, they had to take soundings before they could navigate it. The judge, he felt kind of sore. He said he reckoned the body could reform, and the old man with a shotgun maybe, but he didn't know no other way. Chapter 6. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and then he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money. And he went for me too, for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same. He and dodged him and outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I I'd go now to spite Pop. That law trial was a slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get it started on. So every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off the judge for him to keep him from getting to keep from getting a cowhiding. Every time he got money, he got drunk, and every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town. And every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the woods too much, and so she told him at last that if he didn't quit using around there, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me, and took me upriver about 3 mile in a skiff, and crossed over to the Illinois shore, where it was woody and there weren't no houses but an old log hut in a place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me there with him all the time, and I never got the chance to run off. We lived in that hut, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun which he had stole, I reckon, and we fished and hunted, and there was what we lived on. That was what we lived on. Every little while he locked me in and went down to the store, 3 miles to the ferry, and traded fish and game for whiskey, and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time and licked me. The widow she found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over to try and get hold of me, but Pop drove him off with a gun, and weren't long after that till I was used to being where I was, and liked it, all but the cowhide part. It was kind of lazy and jolly laying off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing, and no books or no study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to all be rags and dirt. I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash and eat on a plate and comb up and go to bed and get up regular and be forever bothering over a book, and you have old Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I had stopped cussing because the widow didn't like it, but now I took it up again because Pop hadn't no objections. It was pretty good times up in the woods there. Take it all around. But by and by Pop got too handy with his hickory, and I couldn't stand it. I was all overwhelmed. He got to going away so much too, and locking me in. Once he locked me in and was gone 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he had got drowned, and I wasn't ever going to get out any more. I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave there. I had tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There weren't no window to it big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimney, it was too narrow. The door was thick, solid oak slabs. Pop was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it. because it was about the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind the table, to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised the blanket and went to work to saw a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, and I was getting towards the end of it when I heard Bob's gun in the woods. I got rid of the sounds of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Bob came in. Bob weren't in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was downtown and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial. But then there was ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it. And he said people allowed there be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and they guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable, because I didn't want to go back to the widow's any more and be so cramped up and civilized as they call it. Then the old man got to cussing, and cussed everything and everybody he could think of, and then cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any. After that he polished off with a kind of a general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of, and so called them what's his name when he got to them, and went right along with his cussing. He said he would like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he knowed of a place 6 or 7 mile off to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. That made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckoned I wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. The old man made me go to the skiff and fetch the things he had got. There was a 50-pound sack of cornmeal, and a side of bacon, ammunition, and 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book and 2 newspapers, and wading, besides some tow. I toted up a load and went back and set down the bow of the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckoned I would walk off with a gun and some lines, and take to the woods when I run away. I guessed I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right across the country, mostly night times, and hunt and fish to keep alive, and so get so far away that the old man nor the widow couldn't ever find me any more. I judged I would saw out and leave that night, if Bob got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying till the old man hollered and asked me whether I was asleep or drowned. I got the things all up to the cabin, and then it was about dark. While I was cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A body would have thought he was Adam. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor began to work, he most always went for the government. This time, he says, "Call this government. Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's the law standing ready to take a man's son away from him. A man's own son, which he had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of his raising. Yes, just as that man has got that son raised at last, and ready to go to him, and ready to go to work, and begin to do something for him, and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him, and they call that government. It ain't all nother. The law backs that old Judge Thatcher up, and helps him to keep out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law do, the law takes a man worth $6,000 and upwards and jams him into an old trap of a cabin like this, and lets him go around in clothes that ain't fittin' for a hog. They call that government. I can't get his rights in government like this. Sometimes I've a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, I told him so. I told him Thatcher to his face. Lots of 'em heard me, and can't tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents I'd leave the blamed country and never come near it again. Them's the very words. I says, look at my hat. If you call it a hat, but the lid raises up, and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin, and then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a gentle stovepipe. Look at it, says I. Such a hat for me to wear. One of the wealthiest men in this town, if I could get my rights. Oh yes, this is a wonderful government. Wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free servant there from Ohio, a mudladder, most as white as a white man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see too, and the shiniest hat, and there ain't a man in that town that's got a fine clothes as what he had, and he had a gold watch and chain, and a silver-headed cane, the awfullest old grey-haired nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in college, and could talk all kinds of languages, and knowed everything, and that ain't the worst. They said he could vote, and when he was at home, well, that let me out. Thinks I, what is a country a comin' to? It was election day, and I was just about to go and vote myself, if I weren't too drunk to get there. But when they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that servant vote, I drawed out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said. They all heard me, and the country they may rot for all me. I'll never vote again as long as I live, and to see the cool way of that servant, why, he wouldn't give me the road if I hadn't shoved him out the way. I says to the people, why ain't this servant put up at auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold. He'd been in the States 6 months and he hadn't been there that long yet. There now, that's a specimen. They call that a government that can't sell a free servant till he's been in the States 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government and lets on to be a government and thinks it is a government and yet's got to sit stock still for 6 whole months before it can take a hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free servant and Bob was a going on so he never noticed where the old Limberlegs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over the tub of salt pork and barked both shins, and the rest of his speech was all the hardest kind of language, mostly hove at the servant and the government, though he gave up the tub some too long. Here and there, he hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first to one shin and then the other, and at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub rattling kick. But it weren't good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end of it. Now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair raise, and down he went in the dirt and rolled there and held his toes, and the cussing he'd done then laid over anything he had ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard all Soberry Hagan in his best days, and he said he laid over him too, but I reckon he was sort of piling it on, maybe. After supper, Bob took the judge and said he had enough whiskey there for 2 months and the delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged he would be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key or saw myself out, one or the other. He drank, and tumbled down on his blankets by and by, but luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed around in his way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open, and all I could do, and so before I knowed what I was about, I was sound asleep, and the candle burning. I didn't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream and I was up. There was Pop looking wild and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and scream, and say one had bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started and run around and around the cabin hollering, "Take him off! Take him off! He's biting me on the neck!" I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all fagged out and fell down panting. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands and screaming and saying, "There was devils a hold of him." He tore out, he wore out by and by, and laid still a while moaning. Then he laid stiller and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was laying over by the corner. By the by, he raised up part way and listened, with his head to one side. He says very low, "Tramp, tramp, tramp. That's the day. Tramp, tramp, tramp. They're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me, don't. Hands off. They're cold. Let go. Oh, a poor devil alone." Then he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging them to let him alone, and he rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a begging, and then he went to crying. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by he rolled out and jumped on his feet, looking wild, and came to a place with a clasp knife. And then I couldn't come for him no more. I begged and told him I was only Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me. Once I turned short and dodged under his arm. He made a grab and got me by the jacket between my shoulders, and I thought I was gone. But I slid out of the jacket quick as lightning and saved myself. Pretty soon he was all tired out and dropped down with his back against the floor, against the door, and said he would rest a minute and then kill me. He put his knife under him and said he would sleep and get strong, and then he would see who was who. So he dozed off pretty soon. By and by I got the old split-bottomed chair and climbed up easy as I could, not to make any noise, and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down to make it sure it was loaded. Then I laid it across the turnip barrel, pointing towards Pop, and set it down behind it so to wait for him to stir. And how slow and still the time did drag along. Chapter 7. Get up. What you got? I opened my eyes and looked around, trying to make out where I was. I was after It was after sunup and I had been sound asleep. Pop was standing over me looking sour and sick too. He says, "What you doin' with this gun?" I judged he didn't know nothing about what he had been doing, so I says, "Somebody tried to get in, so I was laying for him. Why didn't you roust me out?" "Well, I tried to, but I couldn't. I couldn't budge you." "Well, all right. Don't stand there palavering all day, but out with you and see if there's a fish on the lines for breakfast. I'll be along in a minute." He unlocked the door and cleared out up the river bank. I noticed some pieces of limbs and such things floating down and sprinkling of bark, so I know the river had begun to rise. I reckoned I would have great times now if I was over at the town. The June rise used to be always luck for me, because as soon as that rise begins, here comes cordwood floating down, and pieces of log rafts. Sometimes a dozen logs together, so all you have to do is catch them and sell them to the woodyards and the sawmill. I went along up the bank with one eye out for Pop and the other one out for what the rise might fetch along. Well, all at once, here comes a canoe, just a beauty too, about 13 or 14 foot long, riding high like a duck. I shot head first off of the bank like a frog, clothes and all, and struck out for the canoe. I just expected there'd be somebody laying down in it because people often done that to fool folks. And when a chap had pulled a skiff out most to it, they'd raise up and laugh at him. But it weren't so this time. It was a drift canoe sure enough, and I climbed in and paddled her ashore. Thinks I, the old man will be glad when he sees this. She's worth $10. But when I got to shore, Pop wasn't in sight yet, and I was running her into a little creek like a gully, all hung over with vines and willows. I struck another idea. I judged I'll hide her good, and then instead of taking to the woods when I run off, I'd go down the river about 50 mile and camp in one place for good, and not have such a rough time trampling, tramping on foot. It was pretty close to the shanty, and I thought I heard the old man coming all the time, but I got her head, and then I out and looked around a bunch of willows, and there was the old man down the path a piece just drawing a bead on a bird with his gun. So he hadn't seen anything. When he got along, I was hard at it, taking up a trot line. He abused me a little for being so slow, but I told him I fell in the river, and that was what made me so long. I knowed he would see I was wet, and then he would be asking questions. We got 5 catfish off the lines and went home. While we laid off after breakfast to sleep up, both of us being about wore out, I got to thinking that if I could fix up some way to keep Pop and the widow from trying to follow me, it would be it would be a certainer thing than trusting to luck to get far enough off before they missed me, you see. All kinds of things might happen. Well, I didn't see no way for a while, but by and by Pop raised up a minute to drink another barrel of water, and he says, "Another time a man comes a prowling around here, you roust me out, you hear? That man weren't here for no good. I'd a shot him. Next time you roust me out, you hear?" Then he dropped down and went to sleep again. But what he had been saying gave me the very idea I wanted. I says to myself, I can fix it now so nobody won't think of following me. About 12 o'clock we turned out and went along up the bank. The river was coming up pretty fast, and lots of driftwood going by on the rise. By and by along comes part of a log raft, 9 logs fast together. We went out with the skiff and towed it ashore. Then we had dinner. Anybody but Pop would have waited and seen the day through, so as to catch more stuff. But that wasn't Pop's style. 9 logs was enough for one time. He must shove right over to town and sell. So he locked me in and took the skiff and started to towing the raft about 3:30. I judged he wouldn't come back that night. I waited till I reckoned he had a good start. Then I out with my saw and went to work on that log again. Before he was the other side of the river, I was out of the hole. Him and his raft was just a speck on the water away off yonder. I took the sack of cornmeal and took it to where the canoe was hid, and shoved the vines and branches apart and put it in. Then I done the same with the side of bacon, then the whiskey jug. I took all of the coffee and sugar there was, and all of the ammunition. I took the wadding, I took the bucket and gourd. I took the dipper and a tin cup and my old saw and 2 blankets and a skillet and the coffee pot. I took fish lines and matches and other things. Everything that was worth a cent. I cleaned out the place. I wanted an axe, but there wasn't any. Only the one out the wood pile, and I knowed why I was going to leave that. I fetched out the gun, and now I was done. I had wore the ground a good deal crawling out the hole, and dragged out so many things, so I fixed that as good as I could from the outside by scattering dust on the place, which covered up the smoothness and the sawdust. Then I fixed the piece of log back into its place and put 2 rocks under it and one against it to hold it there, for it was bent up at that place and didn't quite touch the ground. If you stood 4 or 5 foot away and didn't know it was sawed, you wouldn't never notice it. And besides, this was the back of the cabin, and it weren't likely anybody would go fooling around there. It was all grass clear to the canoe, so I hadn't left a track. I followed around to see. I stood on the bank and looked out to the river. All safe. So I took the gun and went up a piece into the woods and was hunting around for some birds when I see a wild pig. Hogs soon went well in them bottoms after they had got away from the prairie farms. I shot this fellow and took him into camp. I took the axe and smashed in the door. I beat it and hacked it considerable at doing it. I fetched the pig in and took him back nearly to the table and hacked into his throat with the axe and laid him down on the ground to bleed. I say ground because it was ground, hard packed and no boards. Well, next I took an old sack and put a lot of big rocks in it, all I could drag, and I started it from the pig and dragged it to the door and through the woods down the river and dumped it in, and down it sunk out of sight. You could see that something had been dragged over the ground. I did wish Tom Sawyer was there. I knowed he would take an interest in this kind of business and throw in the fancy touches. Nobody could spread himself like Tom Sawyer, and in such a thing as that. Well, at last I pulled out some of my hair and blooded the axe good, and stuck it on the backside and slung the axe in the corner. Then I took up the pig and held him to my breast with my jacket, so he couldn't drip, till I got a good piece below the house and then dumped him into the river. Now I thought of something else. So I went and got the bag of meal and my old saw old saw out of the canoe and fetched them to the house. I took the bag where it used to stand and ripped a hole into the bottom of it with a saw, for there weren't no knives and forks in the place. Papa done everything with his clasp knife about the cooking. Then I carried the sack about 100 yards across the grass and through the willows east of the house to the shallow lake that was 5 mile wide and full of rushes and ducks too, you might say, in the season. There was a slough or creek leading out of it on the other side that went miles away. I don't know where, but it didn't go to the river. The meal sifted out, and I made a little track all the way to the lake. I dropped Pop's whetstone there too, so as to look like it had been done by accident. Then I tied up the rip in the meal sack with a string so it wouldn't leak no more, and took it and my saw to the canoe again. It was about dark now, so I dropped the canoe down the river under some willows that hung over the bank, and waited for the moon to rise. I made fast to a willow. Then I took a bite to eat, and by and laid down in the canoe to smoke a pipe and lay out a plan. I says to myself, they'll follow the track of that sack full of rocks to the shore, and then drag the river for me, and they'll follow that mule track to the lake, and no browsing down go browsing down the creek that leads out of it, and to find the robbers that killed me and took the things. They won't ever hunt the river for anything but my dead carcass. They'll soon get tired of that, and won't bother no more about me. All right, I can stop anywhere I want to. Jackson's Island is good enough for me. I know that island pretty well, and nobody ever comes there. And then I can paddle over to town nights and slink around and pick up things I want. Jackson's Island's the place. I was pretty tired, and the first thing I knowed I was asleep. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was for a minute. I sat up and looked around, a little scared. Then I remembered. The river looked miles and miles across. The moon was so bright I could counted the drift logs that went a slipping along, black and still, hundreds of yards from shore. Everything was dead quiet, and it looked late, and smelt late. You know what I mean? I don't know the words to put it in. I took a good nap and a stretch. I was just going to unhitch and start when I heard a sound away over the water. I listened. Pretty soon I made it out. It was that dull kind of a regular sound that comes from oars working in rowlocks when it was a still night. I peeped out through the willow branches, and there it was, a skiff away across the water. I couldn't tell how many was in it. It kept a coming, and when it was abreast of me, I see there weren't but one man in it. Thinks I maybe it's Pop, though I weren't expecting him. He dropped below me with the current, and by he came a swinging up shore in an easy water, and he went by so close I could have reached out the gun and touched him. Well, it was Bob sure enough, and sober too, by the way he had laid his oars. I didn't lose no time. The next minute I was spinning downstream, soft but quick in the shade of the bank. I made 2 miles and a half and then struck out a quarter of a mile and more towards the middle of the river, because pretty soon I would be passing the ferry landing and people might see me and hail me. I got out amongst the driftwood and then laid down in the bottom of the canoe and let her float. I laid there and had a good rest and a smoke out of my pipe, looking away into the sky, not a cloud in it. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay down and your back on the moonshine. I never knowed it before, and how far a body can hear on the water such nights. I heard people talking at the ferry landing. I heard what they said too, every word of it. One man said it was getting towards the long days and the short nights now. T'other was said this weren't one of the short ones, he reckoned, and then they laughed, and he said it over again, and they laughed again. Then they waked up another fellow and told him, and they laughed. But he didn't laugh. He ripped out something brisk and said, "Let him alone." The first fellow said he loved to tell it to his old woman. She would think it was pretty good, but he said that weren't nothing to some things he had said in his time. I heard I heard one man say it was nearly 3 o'clock, and he hoped the light wouldn't wait more than about a week longer. After that, they, the talk got further and further away, and I couldn't make out the words any more, but I could hear the mumble, and now and then a laugh too, but it seemed a long ways off. I was away below the ferry now. I rose up, and there was Jackson's Island, about 2 miles and a half downstream, heavy timbered and standing up out of the middle of the river, big and dark and solid, like a steamboat without any lights. There weren't any signs of the bar at the head. It was all under water now. It didn't take me long to get there. I shot past the head at a ripping rate. The current was so swift, and then I got into the dead water and landed on the side towards the Illinois shore. I ran the canoe into a deep dent in the bank and into the bank that I knowed about. I had to part the willow branches to get in, and when I made fast, nobody could have seen the canoe from the outside. I went up and sat down on a log at the head of the island and looked out on the big river and the black driftwood and away over the town, 3 mile away, where there was 3 or 4 lights twinkling. A monstrous big lumber raft was about a mile upstream, coming along down, with a lantern in the middle of it. I watched it come creeping down, and when it was most abreast of where I stood, I heard a man say, "Stern oars there! Heave her head! To starboard!" I heard that just as plain as if the man was by my side. There was a little grey in the sky now, so I stepped into the woods and laid down for a nap before breakfast. Chapter 8. The sun was up so high when I waked that I judged it was after 8 o'clock. I laid there in the grass and the cool shade thinking about things and feeling rested and rather comfortable and satisfied. I could see the sun out at one or two holes, but mostly it was big trees all about, and gloomy in there amongst them. There was freckled places on the ground where the light sifted down through the leaves, and the freckled places swapped about a little, showing there was a little breeze up there. A couple of squirrels sat on a limb and jabbered at me very friendly. I was powerful lazy and comfortable, didn't want to get up and cook breakfast. Well, I was dozing off again when I thinks I hears a deep sound of boom away up the river. I rouses up and rests on my elbow and listens. Pretty soon I hears it again. I hopped up and went and looked out a hole in the leaves, and I see a bunch of smoke lying on the water a long ways up, about abreast the ferry, and there was the ferry boat full of people floating along down. I knowed what was the matter now. Boom! I see the white smoke squirt out of the boat's side. You see, there was firing cannon over the water trying to make my carcass come to the top. I was pretty hungry, but it weren't going to do for me to start a fire, because they might see the smoke. So I sat there and watched the cannon smoke and listened to the boom. The river was a mile wide there, and it always looks pretty on a summer morning. So I was having a good enough time seeing them hunt for my remainders if I only had a bite to eat. Well, then I happened to think how they always put quicksilver on loaves of bread and float them off, because they always go right to the drowned carcass to stop there. So, says I, I'll keep a lookout, and if any of them's floating around after me, I'll give them a show. I changed to the Illinois edge of the island to see what luck I could have, but I weren't disappointed. A big double loaf came along, and I most got it with a long stick, but my foot slipped and I floated out further. Of course I was where the current set in the closest to the shore. I knowed it enough for that. But by and by along comes another one, and this time I won. I took out the plug and shook out the little dab of quicksilver and set my teeth in. It was baker's bread. What the quality eat. None of your low down corn pone. I got a good place amongst the leaves, and sat there on a log, munching the bread and watching the ferry boat, and very well satisfied. And then something struck me. I says, now I reckon the widow or the parson or somebody prayed that this bread would find me, and here it has gone and done it. So there ain't no doubt but there is something on that thing that is. There's something in it when a body like the widow or the person prays, but it don't work for me, and I reckon it don't work for only just the right kind. Thank you that we could sit together. I appreciate it. I don't know how and I don't know when, but I know it's going to be okay. And if it isn't, at least you're not alone anymore. And for that, I'm proud of you. If you need me again, I'll be back soon. Good night.